Well, when I was 4, my dad's boss, who was a pastor, started to abuse me. And shortly after 4, he sold me to one of his friends. And that friend then moved in right next door to my house. And he was a child pornographer. And so from 6 to 8 is when he had moved in. And at 8 years old, he had another man come to the house, and he talked with him, and then that man knelt down by me and said, "You've been paid for." And then he moved in 2 houses down, and he was a trafficker. And they always, from the first moment, threatened my family that I would lose my house, I would lose my family, I would lose everything that I knew if anyone knew what I was doing, not what they were doing to me, what I was doing. And when he moved in down the street when I was 8, he would take me to different places, and they would be behind a convenience store or into an old office building, and men would come and meet him there. And eventually he started having things in his own house, and he would just open up the alley, and then men would come through the alley. And so no one was ever visible from the street. No one could see that. And both the first neighbor and this man were known in the neighborhood as being upstanding. They're the safe houses that you go to. Everybody trusted them. Everybody loved them. And so from the outside, they were just the perfect people that you would want to trust. Because I had to hide it while I was still living at home, I had to hide everything. And because I thought if anybody knew anything, I would lose absolutely everything in my life and probably go to jail. So I would work really, really hard to have my mask covering everything. I didn't have any problems. I didn't have any issues. And I would use humor to blockade absolutely anybody getting close to my heart. In the process of that, I had to feel things because the pain was so intense. And so I developed an incredible eating disorder. And that was ruling my life and killing me, basically. And then I was also a cutter, and anything that I could come across that would numb pain that people would not be able to see. And I would hide the evidence of everything. People often thought I was the daredevil, which I would have to be. I would challenge people to dares of jumping off roofs or climbing poles and then falling off, because I would end up with a bruise from one of the men, and I had to create a cover story of why I had it. And so because I was always in the emergency room from doing some stupid thing, no one ever questioned why I had so many bruises and why I had different injuries. They just knew that I had decided to challenge someone to a speed race down a hill and flip my bike or something like that. And even the nurses occasionally would mention to me, apparently they didn't mention it to my parents, but they mentioned it to me, asking me about scars that I had when they were doing like gynecological exams, and they never followed procedure of what they should have done at that time. They should have reported, they should have done anything, and any movement from anyone would have saved me. And they would ask me instead, what is this? And I'd make up some huge story of why I have that scar, and I'd entertain them with the laughter of coming down from a rocket ship that I built out of wood at camp and rolled it down the hill and ended up in the lake. But I ended up getting injured in the process. And because no one actually asked the right questions and no one did the steps that they should have done of reporting it, of telling my parents, of anything, it continued until I was 14 years old. And when I was 14, I was attacked by a dog, and she ripped my face. And I believe two things were going on. One, I was aging out of what this guy wanted, but two, nobody wanted to request me anymore because I had the scars on my face. And the day that he told me that I was never to come back, I wasn't to ask to come see his daughter, I wasn't to come back to him. When I tell people that, they think, wow, that's a victorious, you are free. But to me, I had one and only identity, and I had just been told I wasn't acceptable for it. And it broke me. I completely fell apart. And I went out into his front yard, and he had a tree, and I started ripping the bark off of the tree and screaming. And it was a desert plant, and the more I ripped, the more I realized I was never getting to the heart of the tree. It was just bark. It was just bark. And I knew that this was my soul plant, that it was representing who I was. It was completely masked. It had no full identity. And I, too, was just a mask and thought that I had zero anything behind the mask because my identity I was no longer acceptable for. So the only mask I had was to be the perfect child, the perfect pastor's kid, and let people only see the smile. And years later, I went back to that house to confront the memories there, and it just happened to be on the day that the new owner of the house was cutting down that tree. And I ran up to the sidewalk, and I probably looked a little bit insane because I was cradling the tree in the driveway and just sobbing because it had like 6 inches thick of bark, but at the center was an actual tree. And at the moment that I was healing and realizing I was real, I could see that the tree that had represented me was also real.
Right. Thank you so much for telling us how adaptive. I'm very impressed with how adaptive you were. You really used a lot of skill to keep yourself safe and your family. So it sounds like you were made to feel like this was your problem and that you were alone in this.
Yes, absolutely.
Were you surprised that adults that should have been protective, like healthcare workers and so forth, school people, weren't more clever, weren't more aware of what was going on and more helpful?
I didn't expect them to be helpful because I thought if they knew, I was going to jail. And so part of me thought maybe they do know, but they're being lenient to me. They're protecting me by not getting involved because I would be the one that's ending up in jail. And the reality is that I would have been saved, but I had been taught so much that this was entirely my fault. And several, when they would take us to like hotels and things, we would come into contact with other girls or boys, but mostly girls. But I wasn't in groups where the girls would travel together. I rarely knew them, or occasionally it would be I met them again in the room. But we all went by different names, nicknames. And just in the little bit of us talking, there would be a couple times where a stranger would wander into where we were at, or one time a police officer walked up to us, and we were so afraid. We were about 10 or 11, and we were so afraid that he was going to figure out what we were doing, that we fully covered what was going on in the room behind us, when we could have simply told him and we would have been safe, but we had no idea that we would have been safe.
Well, that's a very risky transition, extremely risky. I can completely understand how you would be afraid of it. You had no reason necessarily to trust the police.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give to girls who are being trafficked right now? How to get safe, how to take care of themselves, and ultimately how to regain their self-confidence?
First, I would say that it is not your fault. No matter who has told you, it is your fault. No matter who has told you you are dirty and no one would understand, no matter who has said that, they are lying. The truth is, it is not your fault. You are not to blame. You are innocent. You can text info to the number 233733 and let them know that you need help. Let them know that you are trapped. You can go to any emergency room and talk to anyone there and demand to see a sane nurse, a sexual assault nurse examiner, and they will help get everything reported. You can tell them that you are not safe where you are, even if your trafficker is not in the same state, they still hold a power over you. Even if they are not on the same continent, they still hold a power over you because of the network of people they have placed surrounding you. And they know that you know that they have people watching you. But what they don't know is community is becoming so aware, and the community is going to surround you, and the community is going to fight for you. And you have so many people on the front lines for you. You are not alone. There are organizations all over standing up to scream that the survivors are the ones that we need to save. We need to encircle. We need to pull to safety. And it sounds foreign right now. It sounds like I'm speaking a different language, but there is freedom, and there's healing, and there's power and safety. And that is beautiful, and it's not a daydream. It's a promise.
How could adults help, and maybe other girls even help? What are some of the signs that you would like people to pay more attention to?
We were in the city, and I had lots of interactions with people. I had been going to school, and then for junior high, like right before junior high, and then all through junior high, I was homeschooled. And I was homeschooled because I had a stalker. And ironically, my parents told me I could only go to the safe houses on our street, which the safe houses on our street were actually the traffickers' homes. Yes, so one of the things is the very first counselor that I ever went to, I was 21, I was terrified, and my pastor had actually told me this was the only person I could go talk to. And so I went and talked to her, but she had seen me grow up. And after I told her just a brief glimpse of what had happened, she said, I always wondered because there were so many signs. And I nearly flipped the table and walked out because we think that we recognize signs, but then we listen to the other adults and we say, oh, well, they can't really be the signs that I'm thinking. But you were thinking it. Why were you thinking it? Why did it come to your mind? The people that are hurting our children and that are hurting our sisters, our daughters, our cousins, our brothers, our fathers, our friends, these people do not look like you think they are supposed to look. They aren't wearing gold chains or carrying machine guns. They are the ones that you are walking over to because you feel safer next to them. They're the ones that are clean cut. They're very gentle and very kind. They will listen to your broken heart. They will hold you and hug you. And yet, when you look around at the kids that are near them, you see that the kids have a strange interaction, or they either feel completely obligated and beholden to the person, or they don't want anything to do with them. And that moment of seeing, why is it that the kids see something different than I do? It's just paying attention to our guts. Actually, they speak and they tell us things. If someone were to suspect me of something and report me, I would be extremely thankful to the person that reported me, because you care more about the children that are in my life than the people who are just standing around. And once I'm viewed as clean and yes, I didn't do anything, we can go forward. But if we suspect something and then we go, oh, I don't want to be the person. I don't want to be the person that actually kind of upsets the boat or upsets this person, then you become the person that says what you're doing is okay. And you become the person that looks at the child and says, if you had higher value, I would have said something. But because the status quo has so much value to me, I'm afraid to say something. It's knowing you saw something and it just didn't sit right with you and you're not quite sure why. And there are anonymous ways of reporting. Just have someone that can swing by and check in. There are so many different resources to be able to say, I chose to do something.
It sounds like you're describing perps as very manipulative, like very nice 1 minute, but then, obviously very cruel in other ways. That makes it very hard to identify these people.
It does. It makes it very difficult to identify them, but it also makes it equally difficult to get the girls away. If the traffickers were 100% monsters, it would be easy to try to escape, but they aren't. They are definitely deep and evil monsters, but they also are the people that are there willing to listen to the child's pain. And they let them know that, I'm here for you. Even though the here for you has a fee, and that fee is very high. I can remember one time in particular that my rabbit died, and I just needed someone to talk to because my rabbit was my life. And I went in to speak to my parents, and they were both preparing sermons and didn't have time to talk with me. And I went to my siblings, and they had both left they didn't live there at the time with me. They were much older than I am, but they had both left. And I took a moment of knowing that if I walked 2 houses down, I was going to have to pay a very high price for having him listen to my tears. But I also knew it was worth it because I needed someone to hear me. And so I went down to his house and I sat on his lap. And I wept and wept, and I told him all the stories I could remember about my rabbit. And he cried with me, and he held me, and he told me things about his animals that he had when he was a kid. And in my mind, that's one of the best memories I have, which is so horrific to think of who he was, yet he met a need that I had. And if we as adults can reach out safely to those kids around us and meet those needs, then when those monsters come by, they will be able to identify them as monsters and say, I have this person that I can talk to over here, and when we're done talking, we get ice cream or we watch a movie, and that's it. It's always safe. But with this person over here, when we were done talking, it's all pain afterward, and I can identify that is different.
You created an organization to help survivors specifically with financial help.
Well, I had paid nearly $108,000, probably more, for my own healing. So I started doing more research to see, am I just the obscure one that had to pay so much for my own healing? Or how does that go? And I found out that the average lifetime that a survivor needs is $122,000. But if you have a girl that was just rescued from trafficking and she can barely handle being alone in her own apartment, let alone going out to get healing, we're expecting her to get a full-time job, so she has to choose maybe between feeding her child or going to an office and sitting across the desk from somebody and weeping as they heal through what happened. She's going to choose to feed her child. And there shouldn't be that choice. It should never have to be on the table. It should be our community coming around and saying, we don't believe that any survivor should ever have to pay for their own healing. And so I started Kick It Darkness. And Kick It Darkness's belief is just that. No survivor should ever have to pay for their own healing, whether that is therapeutic healing or if you need to add in self-defense training or if you need to add in equine therapy, maybe to regain some trust. You need to start on an animal level rather than human. Whatever it is that you need, you shouldn't have to pay to be restored to the humanity that you started at. And we want to team up and bring the community together to let the community know you can actually sponsor survivors through their healing. You can, if you have a heart for jiu-jitsu, we have women-empowered programs that we work with teaching survivors how to completely become capable of defending themselves. And so it is watching a survivor enter the room totally terrified, not sure how to protect themselves because they haven't been able to in the past. Going through the program and coming out, their shoulders are higher, their smiles are wide. We also have a children's program. Coming out with confidence and knowing I am not in the same place that I was. I am so much farther along. And so that's where we want to bring it to the community, that we can do this together. We don't have to lean on someone else, and we definitely don't have to tell the survivors to lean on their own pocketbooks and mortgage their souls.
You are so mature and well-spoken. Do you feel that you're well underway with your healing process?
I do. I look back on my healing journey every once in a while. I'm just stunned. I do a thing called the Word of the Year, where you, as the end of the year is coming up, you focus on a word that the universe is going to use in that next year to transform your life. And a few years ago, when I started the project, I chose the word confront. And through that next year was when I really, really confronted my past. And I reported every single person that I could report. The next year after that was Unleash. And that's when Trauma Healing Services came into my life. And I was able to really start that massive overhaul in my soul and produce healing. And then this year's word is fly. And I'm bringing Kick It Darkness to the world and showing others that they too can fly. Once you've come this far, no one can take it away. Just keep going. No matter if you go back into needing to cut or something, always call for help if that comes to your mind. But no matter if that happens, you didn't lose ground. You just stumbled into a little hole on the road, and you're still climbing, you're still rising, and you will succeed.
You are such a fabulous individual. You are indeed flying. Thank you for your strength. And thank you for having the courage to speak up and make this a conversation that we should all be having. You're educating us, so I really appreciate that. Anything?
Thank you for having a heart. The heart to listen, the heart to want to help. That is 90% of the battle, to allow you to transform lives. And that is what we're doing. We have right now the holiday catalog of community businesses coming alongside and saying anybody who purchases through the holiday catalog, they're going to donate to sponsor survivors through their healing. So that is available on our site. It's kickitdarkness.com or kickitdarkness.org.
And that's where we can also sponsor individuals.
Yes, you can also sponsor individuals.
Do you know what your next word of the year will be?
I do not yet know, but I have been thinking about it, and I'm excited for it to come. If people would like to follow my journey is I'm building the site BilliJoy.com, and my story is going to be up there. That's BilliJoy.com. And something that has been powerful in my journey are my Converse shoes. And from the time of me first deciding to speak out and then the places where I've gone to travel and speak, my comfort has been in those shoes. And so I started using them to document where I was at. And those, I have a card line that I've created with the shoes and important places on my journey. And those help sponsor me to be able to go out and continue to speak and continue to train and bring awareness to people. And so I know that my past is extremely painful, but I also know that I would not be where I am today if I didn't have it. And so with mixed emotions, I have extreme gratitude for it because I'm in a place where I can bring hope to other people. And that is beyond worth it to me.